Every spring, you do the same thing. You drive to Home Depot or your local garden center, you fill your trolley with seed packets, bags of compost, bottles of fertilizer, maybe a few sad little seedlings in plastic trays. You spend 200, 300, maybe 500 quid by the time you're done. You go home, you dig, you plant, you water, you weed, you pray. And for a few months, it works. You get some tomatoes, a handful of courgettes, maybe enough basil to make one decent pesto. Then autumn arrives. The frost comes, everything dies, the beds go bare, and next spring you do it all over again. The same seeds, the same soil, the same money leaving your wallet and landing in the same corporate pockets. Year after year after year, like a subscription service you never signed up for but somehow can't cancel. Now let me ask you something that should disturb you. Walk outside. Look at the nearest forest, the nearest hedgerow, the nearest patch of wild land that nobody touches. Nobody replants that. Nobody fertilizes it. Nobody spends a single penny keeping it alive. And yet it produces more biomass, more fruit, more life per square meter than your garden ever will. It has done so for thousands of years, and it will keep doing so long after every garden center on this planet has shut its doors. So why has nobody taught you to grow food the way nature actually does it? The answer is worth about $382 billion a year. And that number is exactly why you've never heard what I'm about to tell you. There is a system, old as civilization itself, that lets you plant once and harvest for 10, 20, even 50 years. No replanting, no annual seed purchases, no dependency. And there are very specific industries spending very serious money to make sure this system stays buried in obscurity. It nearly worked. Nearly. The idea that you could plant a garden once and eat from it for decades sounds like fantasy. It isn't. It's the oldest form of agriculture on Earth, and the fact that it sounds radical to you is itself the most damning evidence of how thoroughly it's been erased from our collective memory. Start in the Amazon. Before Europeans ever set foot in South America, indigenous communities were managing vast forest gardens, sometimes spanning hundreds of acres, so sophisticated that early colonizers mistook them for untouched wilderness. They weren't. Every layer was intentional. Canopy trees producing nuts and fruit, mid-story species yielding medicine and timber, ground-level crops woven between root systems that fed each other through the soil. These communities didn't fight nature, they designed with it, and they ate abundantly from systems that required almost no labor once established. When archaeologists began studying the soil those people left behind, they found terra preta, a black earth so fertile it regenerates itself. 3,000 years later, it's still more productive than anything modern agriculture has engineered. Now cross the Atlantic. In medieval Europe, monastery gardens operated on a remarkably similar principle. Monks weren't planting rows of annual vegetables and ripping them out each autumn. They were cultivating perennial orchards, layered herb gardens, and fruit and nut guilds designed to produce for generations. A single monastery garden fed entire communities for centuries with minimal replanting. The knowledge was there, it was working, it was documented. Then jump forward to 1980s England. A man named Robert Hart, living on a small farm in Shropshire, looked at the ecology of natural woodland and asked the question almost nobody in modern horticulture was asking. What if you designed a garden that behaved like a forest? He planted a modest plot, barely a fifth of an acre, and structured it in layers. Tall fruit trees at the top, smaller nut trees beneath, berry bushes below those, herbs and perennial vegetables at ground level, creeping plants covering the soil, climbers winding up through the canopy. Within a few years, that tiny patch was producing more edible output per square foot than most conventional gardens twice its size, and he was spending almost no time maintaining it. Hart's work inspired Martin Crawford, who in 1994 established a 2-acre forest garden in Devon that now contains over 500 species of edible and useful plants. Crawford barely touches it. The system feeds itself. Meanwhile, On the other side of the world, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren had already formalized this ancient logic into a design framework they called permaculture, a word that literally means permanent agriculture. Their work spread across Australia, into the United States, through Britain and mainland Europe, building a quiet global movement of people who understood something the industry didn't want spoken aloud. You don't need to buy your way through every growing season. You can build a living system that does the work for you. So the question you should be asking right now is not whether this works. The evidence is thousands of years deep. The question is, why? In an age of unlimited information, almost nobody knows about it. Follow the money. That's all you ever have to do. The global commercial seed market is worth $67 billion a year. Not because seeds are expensive to produce, but because the entire model depends on you buying them again and again and again. Monsanto, now hiding behind the Bayer name after a $63 billion merger designed partly to escape its own reputation, controls more than a quarter of that market. Corteva, Syngenta, BASF, they carve up the rest between them. These companies don't sell you seeds that grow into plants that reseed themselves. That would be terrible business. They sell you hybrids, carefully engineered so the second generation is weaker, less productive, often sterile. They sell you annuals, plants genetically designed to live fast, die young, and send you back to the shop next spring. This isn't agriculture. This is a subscription model wearing a straw hat. Now add fertilizer. The synthetic fertilizer industry is worth $230 billion globally. When you grow annuals, you strip the soil every season. Bare earth. Dead biology. So you need to buy nutrients back in a bag, manufactured from natural gas, mined from finite phosphate reserves, and sold to you at markup that would make a luxury brand blush. Every time you rip out your tomato plants in October and leave the soil naked through winter, you're not just ending a growing season. You're beginning a purchasing cycle that feeds an industry twice the size of the global music business. Then there's pesticides. $85 billion a year. Annual monoculture gardens are pest magnets because they have no ecological resilience, no beneficial insect habitat, no biodiversity to create natural checks and balances. So you buy sprays, you buy pellets, you buy granules. You pour chemicals onto the same soil you're trying to grow food in, and somehow nobody in the gardening mainstream stops to ask whether this entire loop was designed not to help you grow food, but to help corporations grow revenue. Add it all up. $382 billion flowing through an annual cycle of dependency. Seed companies, fertilizer giants, and pesticide manufacturers, all feeding off the same fundamental premise: that growing food is something you restart from zero every single year. That premise is a lie, and it is the most profitable lie in agriculture. Here's what makes it personal. The average American backyard gardener spends between $500 and $700 per year on their garden. Seeds, starts, soil amendments, fertilizers, pest control, tools, replacement plants when the first round dies in a late frost. At the end of the season, that garden produces roughly $300 worth of food, and that's if everything goes well. You are paying twice what you harvest, every year, for the privilege of doing all the labor yourself. Meanwhile, a properly designed perennial food forest costs between $300 and $800 to establish once, in the first year, and by year 3, it's producing over $1,000 worth of fruit, nuts, herbs, and perennial vegetables annually with a fraction of the labor. No reseeding, no fertilizer purchases, no pesticide dependency. For 10, 20, 30 years. The maths isn't even close. But here's the part they really don't want you to hear. This isn't just about saving money. This is about what you become when you stop participating in that cycle. You stop being a consumer of your garden and you become the architect of an ecosystem. You stop renting your food supply from corporations and you start owning it, permanently, in living infrastructure that appreciates in value every single year instead of depreciating to zero every winter. That shift in identity is worth more than any harvest. And it terrifies every company whose quarterly earnings depend on you never making it. So now you understand who benefits from keeping this knowledge buried. But understanding the enemy isn't enough. You need to understand the science, the actual biological machinery that makes a plant once harvest forever system not just possible, but inevitable once you grasp how soil, roots, fungi, and time really work together. Part 4. Everything you were taught about how plants feed themselves is, at best, incomplete. At worst, it's a convenient oversimplification that keeps you dependent on products you never needed. Start beneath your feet. In a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil, there are more microorganisms than there are humans on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, all operating in a web of exchange so complex that soil scientists at the USDA have openly admitted we've barely mapped a fraction of it. This is not dirt. This is an underground economy, and it has been running flawlessly for about 400 million years without a single bag of synthetic fertilizer. At the center of that economy is a network most gardeners have never heard of, and it changes everything once you understand it. Mycorrhizal fungi. In 1997, Suzanne Simard, a forest ecologist at the University of British Columbia, published research that stunned the scientific community. She proved that trees in a forest are not competing with each other the way classical botany assumed. They are connected, physically, through an enormous underground fungal network that her colleagues began calling the Wood Wide Web. These mycorrhizal threads attach to the roots of plants and extend outward, sometimes for hundreds of meters, linking dozens of species into a single cooperative system. Through this network, a mature apple tree can send phosphorus to a struggling hazelnut. A nitrogen-fixing clover can share its surplus with a blueberry bush 6 feet away. A dying elder tree can dump its remaining carbon stores into the network so younger plants can absorb them. This is not metaphor. This is measurable, documented biology, published in Nature, in ecology letters, in dozens of peer-reviewed journals over the past 25 years. Now here's the part that matters for your garden. Annual plants, the tomatoes and courgettes and lettuces you replant every year, they barely interact with this network. Their roots are shallow. Their lives are short. They never develop the deep fungal partnerships that make the system work. Every time you pull them out and till the soil, you physically destroy the mycorrhizal threads that took months to form. You are carpet bombing the very infrastructure that would have fed your plants for free. Then you go buy fertilizer to replace what you just annihilated. The industry doesn't just ignore this science. It depends on you ignoring it too. Perennial plants are the opposite. A semi-dwarf apple tree planted this year will spend its first season sending roots deep into the earth, far deeper than any annual crop. Within 2 years, those roots will have formed partnerships with mycorrhizal fungi that extend the tree's effective root system by up to 1,000%. That's not a typo. Research published by the International Mycorrhizal Society shows that a single plant connected to a healthy fungal network can access nutrients from an area 40 times larger than its own root zone. Your apple tree isn't just feeding from the soil directly beneath it. It's tapped into a nutrient highway that stretches across your entire garden, sharing resources with every other perennial plant connected to the same fungal web. And then there's nitrogen, the nutrient gardeners spend the most money replacing. In a conventional garden, you buy it in a bag, manufactured through the Haber-Bosch process using natural gas at enormous energy cost and significant carbon emissions. In a perennial food forest, you grow it. Plants in the legume family, black locust trees, autumn olive, white clover, scarlet runner beans, they host rhizobium bacteria on their roots that pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and fix it into the soil. For free. Continuously. The Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania has tracked this for over 40 years in their Farming Systems trial, the longest-running side-by-side comparison of organic and conventional systems in North America. Their data shows that well-designed perennial polycultures fix between 80 and 130 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year, enough to sustain heavy-producing fruit and nut trees indefinitely without a single external input. The same study found that perennial systems sequester 50 to 70% more carbon than annual systems, building soil organic matter year after year instead of depleting it. This is the engine that powers the entire system. Fungi move nutrients horizontally. Legumes inject nitrogen vertically. Deep-rooted perennials pull minerals up from subsoil layers that annuals can never reach and deposit them on the surface through leaf fall. The system literally builds its own fertility, accelerating over time instead of declining. And the science proving this isn't new or fringe or controversial. It's published, replicated, and sitting in plain sight, ignored by an industry that cannot monetize a garden that feeds itself. Now, before you go outside and start ripping out your raised beds, I need to be honest with you about something. Because if I only told you the extraordinary parts and left out the hard truth, I'd be no different from the corporations selling you miracle solutions in a bottle. This system works. The science is overwhelming. But it is not magic, and the first person who tells you it is trying to sell you something. The hardest part is the beginning. In year 1, your food forest will produce almost nothing. You'll look out at a garden full of small sticks in the ground, some clover, a few herbs, and your neighbor's conventional raised bed will be overflowing with tomatoes, while yours looks like an abandoned allotment. Year 2 is better, but still modest. Your berry bushes might give you a handful of fruit. Your herbs will establish. The ground cover will start doing its job. But you won't be filling baskets yet. The real harvest begins in year 3, and it builds from there, compounding like interest in an account that only goes up. By year 5, you'll be producing more food than that neighbor's annual garden with less than a quarter of the labor. By year 7, you'll have surplus. By year 10, you'll have an ecosystem so abundant you'll be giving food away and wondering why you ever did it any other way. But those first 2 years require something the modern world has nearly beaten out of us: patience. If you cannot sit with a slow start, this system will break you before it rewards you. That is a real cost, and I will not pretend otherwise. There are climate limitations too. Not every perennial works in every zone. If you're in USDA Zone 4 in Minnesota, you're not growing figs outdoors. If you're in the Scottish Highlands, a peach tree will laugh at you and die. The system demands that you know your specific hardiness zone, whether that's the USDA scale in North America or the RHS ratings in Britain, and that you select species matched precisely to your winters, your rainfall, your soil type. A food forest designed for Devon will fail in Aberdeenshire. A guild built for Virginia will struggle in Vermont. This is not one size fits all. It's ecology, and ecology is always local. Then there's the design itself. You cannot just throw perennial plants into the ground randomly and expect a self-sustaining system to emerge. The 7-layer structure that makes a food forest function — canopy, understory, shrub, herbaceous, ground cover, vine, and root — must be planned with intention. Spacing matters enormously. A canopy tree planted too close to your neighbor's fence will cause problems in 5 years. An aggressive spreader like Jerusalem artichoke, planted without containment strategy, will colonize your entire garden by year 3. Comfrey in the wrong spot becomes a permanent resident you cannot evict. Every plant in the system has a role, and placing them without understanding those roles creates competition instead of cooperation. This is design work, real intellectual labor up front, and it's the one investment the system absolutely requires. And if you're in America, there's one more obstacle that has nothing to do with botany: homeowners associations. Across the United States, roughly 53 million homes fall under HOA governance, and many of those associations enforce aesthetic standards that treat anything other than a mowed lawn and a few ornamental shrubs as a violation. A productive food forest, with its layered, wild-looking structure, can trigger complaints, fines, even legal action in some jurisdictions. Several states, including Florida, California, and Illinois, have passed or are advancing food freedom laws that protect residents' right to grow food on their own property. but enforcement is inconsistent and legal battles are exhausting. If you live under an HOA, research your covenants before you plant. Some food forest practitioners have navigated this by designing the front-facing edge of their gardens with attractive flowering species that satisfy aesthetic requirements while hiding productive layers behind them. It works, but it requires forethought. So here is the honest summary. The system demands patience through a slow establishment phase, knowledge of your local climate zone, genuine design effort before a single plant goes into the ground, and in some cases, the willingness to navigate bureaucratic nonsense that shouldn't exist. None of those challenges are permanent. All of them are solvable, and every single one of them pales against the alternative, which is spending $500 a year for the rest of your life to grow $300 of food that dies every winter while corporations pocket the difference. The hard part lasts 2 years. The reward lasts a lifetime. This is where knowledge becomes power, and power becomes food on your table every single year, without asking anyone's permission or spending another penny at the garden center. You have a backyard. Maybe 200 square feet, maybe 500. Doesn't matter. The system scales down beautifully because nature doesn't care about acreage, it cares about relationships between plants. What I'm about to walk you through is a design framework for a small space food forest using the 7-layer structure, tailored specifically for temperate climates across the United States, zones 5 through 9, and Western Europe, including Britain, France, Germany, and the Low Countries. Adapt the species to your zone, keep the architecture the same, and the system will work. Start with the canopy, your tallest layer, and immediately forget everything the nursery told you about full-sized fruit trees. In a small garden, you want semi-dwarf or dwarf rootstock. A semi-dwarf apple on M26 rootstock tops out around 10 to 12 feet, produces full-sized fruit, and begins bearing in year 2 or 3. Plant 1, maybe 2 if your space allows, and choose disease-resistant varieties because you will never spray these trees. Liberty, Freedom, and Enterprise apple varieties were bred specifically for disease resistance and thrive across zones 4 through 8. In Britain, look at James Grieve or Discovery on M26 stock. If you're in zone 7 or warmer, swap one apple for a European pear on Quince A rootstock, or a self-fertile plum like Victoria, which has fed British gardens since 1840 and still outperforms most modern varieties. 1 or 2 canopy trees is all you need. They're the backbone, not the whole body. Directly beneath them, the understory. This is where your system starts earning its keep. Hazelnuts are the backbone of this layer across almost every temperate zone, producing calorie-dense nuts on compact multi-stemmed bushes that rarely exceed 12 feet. Plants a pair for cross-pollination, varieties like Yamhill and Jefferson in North America, or Kentish Cobb and Cosford in Britain. Next to them, elderberry, one of the most underrated food plants in the Western world, producing enormous clusters of berries perfect for syrups, wines, and immune-boosting preparations, while simultaneously attracting pollinators that service your entire garden. Serviceberry, also called Juneberry or Amelanchier, slots in perfectly here too, a graceful small tree producing sweet, blueberry-like fruit in June that birds will fight you for unless you net them at the right moment. In warmer zones, 7 and above, a fig earns its place in this layer spectacularly, brown turkey and Celeste varieties producing 2 harvests per year with 0 maintenance once established. Now the shrub layer, and this is where abundance starts to feel almost excessive. Blueberries are the obvious choice, and they deserve their reputation. But pair them with blackcurrants and redcurrants if you're in zones 3 through 7. Gooseberries if you're in Britain or Northern Europe, where they thrive in cool, damp conditions that would stress most fruit crops. Raspberries go here too, both summer fruiting and autumn fruiting varieties, planted together to extend your harvest window from June through October. A single mature raspberry row, 8 feet long, will produce 10 to 15 pounds of fruit per season, every season, for 12 to 15 years before needing renewal. These shrubs don't just fruit. They create habitat for predatory insects, ground beetles, lacewings, hoverflies, that devour the aphids and caterpillars which plague annual gardens. Your pest control becomes built into the architecture. The herbaceous layer is where most people's imagination stops, but where the real design intelligence lives. Comfrey is the engine of the entire system, a deep-rooted perennial that mines minerals from subsoil layers nothing else can reach, and concentrates them in enormous leaves you chop 3 or 4 times per season and drop as mulch around your trees and bushes. One comfrey plant produces more potassium per square foot than any commercial fertilizer, indefinitely, for free. Bocking 14 is the variety you want because it's sterile and won't spread beyond where you plant it. Alongside comfrey, plant rhubarb, massive harvests from March through June with 0 replanting ever. Asparagus, 20-year productive lifespan from a single planting, yielding spears every spring that would cost you $6 a bunch at Whole Foods. Perennial sorrel for year-round salad greens with a lemony bite. Walking onions that literally replant themselves, toppling over and rooting new bulbs at their tips so your onion patch migrates slowly across the bed in a self-renewing cycle that never ends. Ground cover is the layer most people skip and the one that saves the most labor. Strawberries are the obvious performer, alpine varieties producing small, intensely flavored fruit from May through frost without ever needing replanting. Between and around them, white clover, fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere and feeding it directly to every plant whose roots touch the same fungal network. Creeping thyme in sunnier spots, drought-tolerant, bee-attracting, and tough enough to walk on. This living carpet replaces mulch, suppresses weeds, retains moisture, and feeds the mycorrhizal network that connects your entire system underground. No bare soil. Ever. Bare soil is the original sin of annual gardening, and this layer is your redemption. Vines go vertical, exploiting space annual gardens waste entirely. A single grapevine trained up a pergola or along a fence produces 15 to 20 pounds of fruit per year for 50 years or more. Hardy kiwi, often overlooked, produces smooth-skinned, sweet fruit the size of large grapes in astonishing quantities once it hits maturity around year 3. And it's hardy down to zone 4. If you brew, a hop vine adds beauty, aroma, and function, climbing through your canopy trees, using space that would otherwise grow nothing. Finally, the root layer, the invisible harvest. Horseradish, virtually indestructible once planted, producing pungent roots you dig as needed while the plant regenerates endlessly. Jerusalem artichoke, also called sunchoke, yielding enormous quantities of nutty-flavored tubers every autumn from a single planting, though plant it in a contained area or accept that it will attempt to annex your entire postcode. Now tie it all together with one concept that makes the system more than a collection of plants. The guild. An apple guild means your apple tree at center, ringed by comfrey mining nutrients, clover fixing nitrogen, chives repelling apple scab and borers with their sulfur compounds, daffodil bulbs deterring voles and mice that would gnaw the rootstock, and nasturtiums acting as a trap crop, pulling aphids away from the tree and onto themselves. Every plant in the guild has a job. Nothing is ornamental. Nothing is wasted. This is engineering dressed as gardening, and once it's in the ground and connected through that mycorrhizal web beneath the surface, it runs itself with less effort than mowing a lawn. One last technique to seal the whole system together from day one. Sheet mulching. Lay cardboard directly over your existing grass or weeds, overlap the edges generously, then pile 6 to 8 inches of wood chips, leaf mold, or straw on top. Plant directly through it. The cardboard smothers existing vegetation without digging. The mulch feeds soil biology as it decomposes, and within one season, you've created a planting bed that would have taken weeks of back-breaking double digging to achieve conventionally. From that point forward, every autumn you practice chop and drop, cutting back your comfrey, letting leaves fall where they land, allowing the system to mulch itself with its own biomass, exactly the way a forest floor does. You will never buy mulch again. You will never buy fertilizer again. You planted once. The system has begun. So here you are. You now know something that the seed companies, the fertilizer manufacturers, and the entire $382 billion annual gardening industry would rather you never learned. You know that the system they sold you, the one where you start from zero every spring and pay for the privilege of watching everything die every winter, was never the only way. It wasn't even the original way. It was the profitable way. Profitable for them, not for you. You know that civilizations fed themselves for thousands of years using layered perennial systems that required almost no external inputs. That modern science has confirmed exactly why those systems work through mycorrhizal networks and nitrogen fixation and deep-root mineral cycling. And that the only reason this knowledge isn't taught in every school and printed on every seed packet is because a garden that feeds itself is a customer that's been lost forever. And you know that the design isn't complicated. 7 layers, a few carefully chosen guilds, sheet mulch, chop and drop, and the patience to let biology do what biology has done since long before humans existed. $300 to $800, 1 weekend of planting, 2 years of faith, and then a decade or more of harvests that compound while your neighbor keeps driving to the garden center every April, wondering why this year feels exactly like the last. But knowing isn't enough. Knowledge that stays in your head changes nothing. Knowledge that goes into the ground changes everything. So this is what I need you to do, and I'm not asking you to do it for me or for this channel. I'm asking you to do it because every garden that breaks free from the annual cycle is a quiet act of resistance against a system designed to keep you purchasing, dependent, and convinced that nature needs corporate intervention to function. Every food forest planted in a suburban backyard is a living protest against the lie that food must be manufactured fresh each year at your expense. Plant 1 tree this season, just 1. A semi-dwarf apple, a plum, a pear. Put comfrey around its base and clover at its feet. That's it. That's your first guild. That's the first year of a system that will be feeding you long after you've forgotten the price of a bag of fertilizer. Next year, add the understory. The year after, fill in the shrub layer. Let the ground cover spread. Let the fungi connect the roots. Let the system teach you what the industry never would, that the most productive garden you'll ever grow is the one you plant once and never have to buy again. Share this video, not because I need the algorithm's approval, but because somewhere right now, there's a gardener staring at a dead raised bed full of frozen annual stems, wondering why this hobby costs so much and rewards so little. And they deserve to know that another way exists. Every share pushes this knowledge past the gates that were built to keep it contained. Every subscription means one more pair of eyes on information that powerful industries have spent decades making sure stays marginal, underfunded, and invisible. And if you think what you learned today was dangerous to the system, wait until you hear what's coming next. There is a fungus living beneath your feet right now, in every patch of soil that hasn't been poisoned, and it is running an intelligence network more sophisticated than anything Silicon Valley has ever built. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to wake it up, multiply it, and deploy it in a garden as small as 10 square meters to do something the fertilizer industry will tell you is impossible. They're wrong. And they know they're wrong. That video drops soon. Be here.